Hi, welcome to the 9th episode of Futurecast. I'm Bala Kamlakaran, the host for the show today. We are actually sitting in the Iceland Ocean Cluster, and behind me is the fish market. And as you can see, there are tubs of fish. And we're going to be talking about space. So I thought that was the perfect setting. And today we have a good friend, a longtime mentor, Ari Jónsson, who's the rector of Reykjavik University. But before the rector of Reykjavik University, you were with NASA. You're a Stanford and Berkeley alumni. So I'm going to stop there and welcome you to Futurecast. So we're going to talk about how to build the future.
You're listening to the Futurecast.
So Ari, let's start from the beginning. So how did you get into NASA?
So I did my PhD at Stanford University with emphasis on artificial intelligence. This is actually back when artificial intelligence was not cool.
Yeah.
People seriously asked me whether I was ever going to get a job based on this education. And most people actually thought that the artificial intelligence research was a dead end.
Yeah.
But NASA was looking into using artificial intelligence and the kind of automation that comes with that to help operate its spacecraft. And so there were some scientists at NASA at that point that were looking into these kinds of technologies that I was working on. I met them at Stanford through some of the interchanges and the connections that Stanford has with the environment. And when I expressed interest, they expressed mutual interest. I did 2 days of interviewing with 2 different NASA centers and a few other places, and decided that this NASA was the place to go.
Cool.
So spent 10 years there.
Yeah, wow. As I said, where were you in NASA? Which center? Was it in?
So it's called Ames Research Center.
Ames Research Center, yeah.
It's in Silicon Valley, so it's right next door to Google headquarters, which was actually unfortunate because Google was stealing people left and right as they were growing. But it's in the middle of Silicon Valley. It started out as an aeronautics center, computational fluid dynamics, etc. But as the computers became a bigger part of spacecraft operations, this center became the hub for developing IT, automation, artificial intelligence, etc. for space operations.
Cool. So what did you do in NASA? Is it confidential or
only a little?
Only a little.
Only what we did with the military is confidential.
Yeah.
Everything else is open book, and what is even more, it's open software. So almost everything we developed was made of open software, so people can use it. I started out as a research scientist, continuing to develop the technology that had been the foundation of my PhD thesis, and working on that for a year or two with some grants. And we got to the point where it was ready for deployment. And we started working on deploying it for controlling Earth satellites.
Okay.
Working with Goddard Space Center that handles those. Then all hell broke loose at NASA. And this was back in 1999. NASA was in the middle of a revolution they called faster, better, cheaper. They found out, unlike the startup community, that it's really hard to do all three with the culture that they have at NASA. And so in 1999, they lost 2 spacecraft.
Yeah.
Very expensive ones. And Congress decided that either NASA did something properly and something noticeable, or they would start cutting funding to space exploration, especially the solar system. So NASA came up with a very ambitious plan to put 2 rovers on Mars and actually move around. And I got rolled into this mission, and the role that I had was to develop and lead the development of software that would use automation and artificial intelligence to help operate the spacecraft every day, to help scientists and engineers operate safely, and to get as much out of every day as possible.
Yeah.
And this was basically my heart, mind, and everything was in this for the next 3.5 years.
So the Mars rover that is still there now.
Yep, they're Spirit and Opportunity, which were the first two
Yeah.
successful rovers that actually did some great things. They were the ones that...
They were the pioneers
Yes.
of Mars.
Yes, they showed that we could actually move around Mars
Yeah.
and do experiments, gather data. And the difference between a lander that just sits in one spot and is stuck with whatever material is right around it, and a rover that can go to interesting places is like night and day.
Right.
And the insights that we got from that mission, they're amazing. You know,
Yeah.
it's confirmed a lot of conjectures about water having been on the surface of Mars. And the missions that we've seen since then, including the newest one, Perseverance, they are all follow-ons. They're just taking the leads that we got out of that mission and taking it further. And we're getting closer and closer to getting a sample from Mars down to Earth, where we can see if there was life.
Yeah, that's just fascinating, and that's like what, 20 years now?
Yeah, we're looking at that. So the current mission is actually in the middle of gathering samples, putting them in containers, and these are specially designed so that the plan is for a joint NASA, ESA, the European Space Agency mission, to go and retrieve those and bring those samples back to Earth.
Yeah.
And then we can really figure out what's going on.
That'd be
there.
so cool.
It'll be so cool.
It'll be so cool. But I mean, of course, you decided to come to Iceland, and this was year 2006, I would
2007 when I moved. So after the rover mission, I had started taking on more and more administrative and management positions. And by the time that by 2005-06, I was managing a $10 million project with 5 different centers, and I had stopped programming and stopped doing research and was in a management role. So after 10 years, which is a freakishly long time in Silicon Valley doing any one thing, I decided it was time to change and move to Iceland. First to become the Dean of the School of Computer Science, then a couple of years later take on being the president of the university, and I did that for 11 and a half years.
Yeah, it seems like forever, but as I can tell you that I have seen your job since the beginning, because we met right when you're taken on, and coming to the topic of hackathons. When I pitched the idea that we should do the first hackathon in Iceland, I think it was 2011, right at the time we were doing Startup Iceland.
Yep.
I think you're probably the only one who knew what a hackathon was in Iceland. You know, I'm not exaggerating. I think I'm right. People looked at me like I'd gone crazy at that time. They're like, "What is this word you're using called hackathon?" So you know, walk me through maybe how you saw Iceland at that time, and you know, of course, it's easy to look at the present to quantify where we are, but at that time, it's always a leap of faith.
Indeed, and you know, the premise for us the family moving to Iceland in 2007 was the progress that had been made in Iceland since I moved away in 1991, and it's a different country. But there was still a lot more to be done, and in particular, having lived in Silicon Valley for 16 years, it was notable, you know, there were good seeds for innovation, entrepreneurship. We had some companies that had proven that it could be done in Iceland, but there was just a lot missing.
Yeah.
And part of what we focused on at Reykjavik University during my time there has been to help develop this environment in Iceland. The idea of innovation, that is to say, you know, find new solutions, technology that can be used for solving problems that nobody else has solved, etc. But then also, you know, getting students, staff, and the entire, you know, community excited about, you know, entrepreneurship. So it's just basically just take an idea and make it happen.
Right.
And there are so many ways you can do this. We teach this undergraduates. We have a huge course. We have a master's level courses that do this in a different way. We participate with primary schools and middle schools and everybody to get them used to this idea. But then you want to reach out into the community and help people who have ideas make them happen, to help companies or entities that have issues, problems that they need solved, to get some ideas, which is basically what a hackathon does.
Sure.
Is to say, here's a problem, get a bunch of smart people, work on it. Then you want to create, the supporting environment that is needed, both in terms of, mentoring support, financial support, etc. And so I sacrificed myself and sat on the Science and Technology Council for 10 years to help move that along, and that worked well. But there's also the question of mentality, and one thing that I've noticed, there have been huge breakthroughs in the environment here, thanks to you and tons of people who have been contributing to this.
I mean, that has been one of the most gratifying thing to watch. It's easy to be just one crazy guy just banging the door, and others looking at this and actually taking it seriously and working on it. And I think, I have to attribute a lot of that to you, because when more people start saying the same thing, then the mindset changes. Yeah. And just
Indeed.
like you, I saw that lots of things were missing and somebody had to do it. And that's why I kind of did Startup Iceland and all the things that led to where we are today. But lots of other people did too. I think it's been a massive community effort, which is, I think, is going to pay dividends for years to come.
No question about it. And if it's kind of nice to do a retrospective, when this much time has passed. So if we look at the discussion that was around innovation and entrepreneurship after the financial crash in 2008, it was very immature. Yeah. There was the idea that we would somehow fix this all with some innovation and do something. Yeah. There was no support, there was no connections, there was very little know-how in all of these things. And government support was limited. Today we have, funds, we have, grants, we have investment funds, we have so much grassroots support, we have connections abroad, we have all of these things. But the biggest thing that I've noticed, and I think matters so much, and is the mentality. Yeah. Because in 2008, all talk about failure is that, you're out. Yeah. It was basically one strike, you're out. Yeah. If you failed with a company, that was it. Yeah. But today the mentality is, you have to try. Yeah. And if you don't succeed in the first try, then you just try again. Yeah. And you have a lot of know-how, etc. And because we were talking about space and NASA back in 1999, when they were trying to do faster, better, cheaper, NASA couldn't do faster, better, cheaper because they didn't have that mentality that the innovation and the startup community has. But look at SpaceX. They did exactly that, faster, better, cheaper. Yep. How? By failing so many times. Yeah. How many rockets did they blow up before they finally succeeded? Yeah. But that's what is needed. You have to allow people to try, fail, and try again. For those of us who have been, at least watching it, as they say, how the sausage is made. Innovation is a lot of tinkering. Yeah. You have to tinker, you have to start somewhere, you have to build something, and it doesn't work the first time. You kind of iterate and make it better and start moving forward. But that kind of comes back to one of the things that I've been trying to do, which is, how do you build the future? You build the future by tinkering on ideas that you want to see happen. And, bringing it in the context of Iceland. And of course, you get to meet a much different group of people than I do. Most of the time I spend with founders. And as I say, founders are my tribe, so it's easy because I don't have to preach to the gospel. They know what it is, they know how to do it, and I enjoy that aspect of it. But tell me about your conversation in Iceland before to now in terms of what is possible. I think that is what has been fascinating for me to see as just an observer. Yeah. So I think when we started out on this, and at least when I started getting involved, and of course there was a bunch of people who started even earlier and have contributed a lot. But what I noticed is what this was thought of, as novel, as a new type of industry, and something that you could sort of decide on doing, and it would just happen. Whereas the reality is that real innovation, real entrepreneurship, and the successful entrepreneurship and with innovative ideas requires an environment. It requires not just a decision to do it. And I think the best example we can see is all around the world, there have been lots of areas that have decided to become the new Silicon Valley. Very, very, very small percentage have succeeded. And it's not because of where Silicon Valley is in the world. It's because Silicon Valley managed to put together all of these elements that make these things possible.
Right.
And Iceland is a whole lot closer to this now. We're not there yet. No. There's more stuff to do.
Yep.
But with the increased education, more know-how that we have, with better understanding in the community about how this works, better support from the government that has played a key role in all of this, and then a better connection, a broader mind in terms of what this all means. That is to say, we are here innovating and building up new ideas, not just for Iceland, but for the world. And Iceland is such a small market that you have to, it's been said many, many times, but you have to think larger. And that does not just mean that you're going to imagine 1 million customers or 10 million customers. You actually need to think outside of the country. You need to build connections to investors. You need to build connections to people who can market for you. You need to build sales channels. You need to build a lot of things that for most Icelanders, we're in the hands of just the export companies back in the old days.
Right.
So it's a new mentality that we have to. When talking about the fisheries industry that is here behind us, they had to perfect this. And that's what we should look towards. We need to have a network.
Right. I think the network model, I think COVID has made it more obvious. I mean, the ones who've been networked, who understand how it worked, understand how to run in this world. You don't have to sit in one place or be in Silicon Valley or New York. You can be anywhere, which is something that was obvious to me, but maybe not so obvious, but now everybody understands it. The context of building, say, a space startup in Iceland, if we had talked about it in 2011, people would have kind of laughed at you and thrown you off. Today, actually, doesn't sound that crazy to do from here because, guess what? SpaceX is based out of LA. There was no space industry in LA, right? I mean, if you think about that, right? One of the other things that I hear as, you need to have this network of businesses that need to support you. True, but again, when everything is decentralized, but digitally you're connected, it doesn't matter where you are. So I think Iceland kind of bodes well in this world. Just want to give you thoughts on that.
Indeed, and I think another thing that we've seen develop and it's related to this is that and you still see a little bit of it, but we're always trying to figure out, what can Iceland, what makes sense for Iceland to do, and try to narrow the scope, to something that connects with fish industry or something like that. Whereas in reality, the world is just completely connected. And it doesn't matter whether you're looking at space operations, whether you're looking at the IT world, whether you're looking at artificial intelligence and the infinite number of possibilities that we have in applying that. Even just manufacturing. I mean, you take your average car or your ship or anything that we use here. This has components. This has innovations. This has software from all over the world. And Iceland has a role to play with a lot of these components. And if we look at space specifically, Iceland has a number of advantages. Being a connecting point between the east and west of the Atlantic is an advantage because there are so much connections between the space industries in Europe and North America. The wide open spaces that we have, the untouched basaltic planes that we have, which are just about as close to Mars as you can get
Right.
On Earth. And we're not just talking about NASA sending robots and stuff.
No.
We need to figure out how we build houses on Mars. We need to figure out how we build houses and coverage on the moon when we go there, et cetera, et cetera. So Iceland has a lot to offer here, even if we don't expect the massive lunar rockets to be launched from here.
No.
But we can launch, Earth-observing satellites from here, especially the ones going to polar orbit.
Sure.
And we're a fantastic location also for talking to those satellites.
Right. I mean, this comes into the context of the hackathon that we're going to do in November.
Indeed.
I'm giving you a little bit brief, and you're going to be a mentor. So this is the Cassini, space hackathon. But the challenge is to protect the Arctic. How are we going to navigate the seas in the Arctic region? How do we preserve the life in the sea and also preserve the land in the Arctic region? Because it's kind of like the last frontier we have.
Indeed.
And we can use space technologies to solve these problems. And in that regard, we're getting data from the Galileo and the Copernicus systems from the EU, which is going to be massively good. And I hope a lot more founders see this as an opportunity and jump into the world. And I think there's no edge. Everybody has the same edge in space because location doesn't matter because everything is up there. You could be sitting in Antarctica for crying out loud and you still have the same data beaming down.
Yep.
So protecting the Arctic, we live in the Arctic region, and you talked about how to, this plane that we have, how do you build here? I've been thinking a lot about how do we grow food here, right? That's a big problem, in space. If we're going to have life there, we need to know how to preserve life. And maybe you can share some insights from NASA. What were the earlier thinkings on how do we grow food?
This is, there are so many things to touch upon here. But just to follow up on the hackathon, so if you think about, space and what we're doing there, and especially when we look at how we're using spacecraft and satellites and information from there to protect our planet and to operate better, that yes, somebody has to build a spacecraft and operate it and launch it and all of these things, but in the end it is all data.
Yeah.
And we, with the know-how that we have here of the Arctic, of the weathers, of the environments and all of these things, we're very well positioned to work through the data that you can get from these satellites about what's happening in the Arctic, what impact does it have, what impact does it have on the ocean, the fish, land, rivers, glaciers, all of these things. We have a lot of expertise here, so we really are a good place to be doing this part. But when it comes to going further away, from Earth observing satellites, and this International Space Station, there you basically cheat. You just ship food there. You just go to the supermarket. Every once in a while, you have SpaceX or some Boeing or somebody launch you a capsule with a bunch of food and stuff. If you go to the moon, you can maybe do that for a little bit, but if you go to Mars, you can't.
No.
And basically, when I was working at NASA, we had a vision. We were working out a vision about how to, get to exploration of Mars, sample a return from Mars, humans on Mars. This was all part of our agenda. And one of the things that we're working out is what was called, in situ resource utilization. How do you use what Mars has to offer to create all of these things we need? You can make, there's water there. That's one of the things that was fantastic to find. There's ice under the surface. That gives you water, oxygen, fuel. There are tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. You turn this into methanol, you get fuel up to, as much as you need. Food, it's a little trickier. The soil there is not awesome. No. So you need to figure, and there's limited sunlight. So you need to start looking at trade-offs. Do you grow food slowly with what limited sunlight you have? Do you, how do you bring the nutrients that you need for the soil? How do you create the circulatory environment that you can do all of these things? Or do you just set up a power plant, a power farm, solar panels or what have you? and then concentrate that energy to basically grow food in greenhouses, very much like we do in Iceland.
Exactly.
You know, with artificial lights and heat.
You know, I'd say, you know, it's kind of like the Occam razor, right? The obvious answer is always the right answer. I just think that that's probably the way we will do it, right? I mean, if you think about it, if you can concentrate power, we know how to grow food once there's power.
Indeed.
And guess what? I think that's how we'll do it. I don't think we need to kind of reinvent the wheel there. We know how to do that. We grow food here using LED lights and power.
Indeed.
So we should, you know, look at most useful technologies.
Yes.
With that, you know, I think we're coming to the conclusion of what we started, but I know we can talk forever about this, and we have talked forever about this. Coming to the end, you know, last few words about the context of what we're going to do here in Iceland and all that, and also maybe a few words about your new role. You know, so what is this company? What do they do? What are you trying to do there?
So this is actually a very exciting company. So I'm thrilled to be part of that team. So to explain briefly what the company does, it's best to start with the problem. And the problem is cybercrime. And we've seen this now finally in the news when large, well-known companies have been the subject of cyber attacks. You know, a pipeline was shut down in the United States for
And
a long
ransomware.
time for a ransom.
Yeah.
There have been a number of financial crimes against companies with people breaking into the systems, either using the data in some way, exposing the data and causing harm, or holding the company hostage and demanding ransom. And the numbers in this are staggering because only a very small percentage of the crimes actually gets into the news. And there are estimates that put cybercrime at being, in value annually, like the third largest economy in the world by the middle of this decade. So we need to fight this. There's been a lot of development in hardware and software to fight this, firewalls and two-factor authentication, etc. The biggest problem is that 90% of the break-ins are through the humans. It's by hacking humans. And the only way to prevent that is to train people, to train the employees, to train the managers to respond correctly when there is an attack or when people are trying to do things through phishing, password breaks, or things like that. And if you're going to have an impact through training, the training has to be received by the staff, and it has to be memorable. And that is what AWAREGO has a unique position, is that we have short videos. They're a minute each, so people don't mind watching them. They're fun, but they're very impactful. And we then close the loop by offering companies a solution where we analyze what's the status. How do people respond to these kinds of things? Do it in a friendly manner, not with attacks where people get scolded, but in a friendly manner where we find out how people behave. We use that to analyze what training people need. We provide that training targeted down to an individual, and then we show the company afterwards what the impact has been in terms of increased security. This is the way to solve the cybercrime problem for the future.
So you're
and that's
solving
what
the
we're doing.
cybercrime problem of the humans.
Yes, and the thing is that, like so often, the humans are the weakest link.
Yep, I think we are the weakest and the strongest link. I think that's a great point to come to the end of this chat. Ari, thanks again.
Thank you.
For being
Great
in
pleasure to be
Futurecast,
here.
and I'm sure it'll be fun for everybody to learn a bit more about space. And to finish off, the hackathon is going to be in November, and if you want to sign up, you know how to find me, so send me a note. Thanks.